company dedicated to enhancing leaders' ability to harness and optimize trust as a strategic business asset.
We are unaware of most things that influence our trust choices and the types of influences that result from trusting.
Ah, unaware. Yeah, I guess this reminds us that trust really exposes us to both positive and negative influences at times. Is that right?
It absolutely does, and we are certainly unaware of most of what's going on.
Well, and I think it's probably helpful to define influence here. Influence has a multiple definitions that could come to mind, but here I think, Anthony, we're just talking about the capacity to affect. Is that right? To move, the capacity to affect?
Yeah, influence can be a fairly simple definition in that way. Yeah, capacity to affect. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned that we're unaware of the things that are influencing either our choice to trust or what happens after we trust. I imagine those are both internal and external things that affect it.
Yeah, and primarily we're thinking about when you choose to make yourself vulnerable, you're thinking about those external influences upon you that you open yourself up to a new risk or it could be positive or negative, right? But there is risk involved. So I think focusing on the external influences, those exogenous influences, is a useful thing to do. But we can also look at those endogenous, those internal things to us, like our different psychological states, right? Our emotions, feelings,
Mm.
beliefs, intentions, those things, those shift and change during the trust process. Even our physiology, think about our physiology, like how our hunger and our thirst and stress that we're experiencing and our different interests that we have, those change some. How it's something that used to be a want might now become a need. So these things
Mhm.
change.
Yeah. So it's not just external forces that we're really evaluating, it's also internal. And that, I guess that leads me, back to, we've talked about before, the importance of emotional intelligence and understanding sort of who you are, how you operate, and what some of your belief systems are so that you can ascertain whether that's a positive or a negative thing that's helping you look at this situation to trust or not trust. What about the external? What are we assessing when we think about it externally?
Yeah, you think about those exogenous influences, it's other humans most often, right? There are other entities out there besides humans, but humans that's what we focus on because we in the workplace we're engaging with other humans so very often. There's also institutions, rules, or social norms of an environment, of an organization, the culture. But so different humans, choices and behaviors that can affect us negatively or positively, different social groups and the dynamics of those groups and teams, but then also the whole culture of the organization that we're in. So those are some different ones that are meaningful when you make yourself vulnerable, willingly vulnerable in your work environment. Those are some different external influences that can affect you.
Hmm. So a lot of things to assess in our choices of trusting and being willing to be influenced. A lot of going, and how much of this is conscious? How much of this happens just very quickly, naturally?
Mm.
Would you say?
Yeah, there's most of it. I mean, trust occurs in the mind. So it's a psychological state. So it's the full process of trust is in the mind. It's not the behavior that follows from it. Uh, but you have to be willing. You have to willingly relinquish some control over yourself. That is the process to trust, and
Mhm.
then put that in the hands of another entity, another person. That's the process. It's all happening internally, and then the exogenous influences are what we focus on. Those things that can affect us negatively, we want to be aware of those so that we can optimize our trust, right size our trust, to pull it back, move it forward appropriately to meet our interests.
Well, some of the things that you focused on there just remind me of the importance of the fact that the pace of change in business and our environments are changing so quickly. Um, and it's really forced sort of the spotlight on inside out leadership and the fact that you really got to understand who you are and how you operate and what some of your beliefs and values and fears are so that you can appropriately assess the external environment, which is happening and changing so quickly. So that starting with self and really understanding self is incredibly important. And even more so now that the pace of change is actually never going to be any slower, as we
Right.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think about swift trust often when I'm thinking about the fast moving pace of business. And as people are changing jobs and organizations and even sectors over the lifetime, many times over their careers, uh, you're constantly having to reassess trust amongst new environments and in new people. And so these combinations of new people in an organizational context is it's taxing. It's psychologically taxing and complex. So it's very important to study this.
Certainly. I mean, I think, you think of the times of my parents, it's like they worked for one company and they really got to know the people and the environment that they were in and not have to think as much about, and there wasn't as much interdependency in the work. Today, I think the average person has at least 12 jobs. And
Mm.
so they're constantly changing environments and assessing or reassessing, how much do I trust? How vulnerable do I be? And not to mention that, the pace of change, mergers and acquisitions, cultures are changing. If you choose to stay with the same company, it's not going to stay the same because mergers and acquisitions are happening and reorganizations are happening more frequently. So it requires us to really pause. And I think I like that idea of pausing and recognizing some of those external forces, internal forces that impact our decisions and realizing there are many there, and we can sort of break those down. But to your point, talk about optimizing trust versus maximizing.
Yeah, no, it's a critical idea. To maximize something is to get more and more of it. It's a good. It's a social good. There's never enough. And every time you increase it, it's a positive. Not the case with trust. Trust is amoral. There can be negative or positive reasons and intentions for trusting, but also implications and consequences could be negative or positive. And so you want to optimize trust. You want to fine tune that for the context that you're in, for the interest that you have.
Yeah, wonderful. I love that idea of optimizing, and I'm sure we'll dig into that deeper questions. Our audience, please let us know what's on your minds, what questions you have that we can answer as we dip into further about optimizing our trust in these volatile, uncertain, ambiguous times.